Hey there, amazing podcast listeners. I'm absolutely thrilled you're here with me today. Thank you so much for tuning in. Before we dive into this incredible episode, I just want to say how grateful I am that you chose to spend your time with me. This means the world, honestly. If you're just discovering me for the first time, welcome to my podcast, where we explore the nuances of real English and how to use it confidently in your everyday life. I'm Lilly, and I've dedicated myself to helping people like you speak English with more ease, comfort, and genuine confidence. You're going to love what we have prepared today. All right, so here's something really important before we get started. If you've been enjoying this content and finding it helpful, I absolutely need you to hit that subscribe button right now. Seriously, take just 1 second and subscribe. It helps me bring you more of this content consistently. Plus, when you subscribe, you'll never miss another episode from our podcast family. And here's something super special for you. Make sure to check out our podcast playlist. I've organized all of our episodes into different categories so you can binge watch your favorite topics whenever you want. Whether you're interested in conversational English, business English, cultural expressions, or just everyday phrases, it's all there waiting for you in the podcast playlist. Just head over to the playlist section and explore everything we've created for you. I'd also absolutely love it if you'd share this episode with someone you know who wants to improve their English. Sharing really helps other people discover the podcast, and it helps me grow this amazing community. So please, share it with your friends, family, coworkers, or anyone who might benefit from learning real, practical English. Now, let me tell you what's so exciting about today's episode. We're going to be diving deep into one of the most important aspects of becoming a fluent English speaker. We're going to explore and master something that truly transforms the way you communicate. Today, you're going to learn about essential expressions and phrases that native English speakers use constantly in their real lives. Think about it for a moment. Have you ever watched an English movie or listened to native speakers talking to each other and felt like you were missing something? Like you understood the individual words, but the conversation flowed in a way that felt so natural and smooth, almost musical? That's because native speakers rely heavily on phrases, not just individual words. They use short, quick expressions that carry meaning far beyond what a single word could convey. What I'm talking about today is the gateway to sounding like a native speaker. It's not about memorizing complex vocabulary words that you'll never use. It's not about perfecting grammar rules that, practically speaking, native speakers bend all the time anyway. It's about learning the real language that real people use when they're speaking to each other in real situations. Whether you're beginners who are just starting your English journey, or you're at an intermediate level and want to take your skills to the next level, this episode is specifically designed for you. I'm going to walk you through practical expressions, give you real-life examples, and we'll practice together. By the end of this podcast, you're going to feel so much more confident about your ability to handle everyday English conversations. The truth is, I've been teaching English for quite a while now, and the single biggest difference I notice between students who progress quickly and those who struggle is this. The successful students focus on learning and using common phrases. They understand that language is about communication, not perfection. They embrace that building confidence comes from practice with real, useful expressions. So here's my challenge for you today. As we go through this episode, I want you to pick at least 3 phrases that really resonate with you. Write them down, say them out loud, repeat them multiple times. Then commit to using them in your actual conversations this week. Whether you're writing an email, having a conversation, texting someone, or speaking in person, incorporate these phrases into your real life. That's how language becomes truly part of you. Let me give you a quick overview of what we're going to cover today. We're going to start with essential greeting and opening phrases because how you start a conversation sets the tone for everything. Then we'll move into politeness and courtesy expressions, because respect is universal, and these phrases help you navigate any social situation. After that, we'll explore phrases for managing your time and making plans, which honestly is something you do nearly every single day. We'll then dive into phrases for expressing agreement and disagreement in ways that keep conversations positive and flowing. You'll learn how to give and receive compliments, how to express surprise and enthusiasm, and how to handle situations where you need clarification or don't understand something. These are game changers, I promise you. We'll then dive into phrases for expressing agreement and disagreement in ways that keep conversations positive and flowing. You'll learn how to give and receive compliments, how to express surprise and enthusiasm, and how to handle situations where you need clarification or don't understand something. These are game changers, I promise you. I want to be really transparent with you about something. Speaking fluent English isn't about being perfect. It's not about never making mistakes. Native speakers make mistakes constantly. What makes them sound fluent is that they don't get hung up on it. They keep communicating. They keep connecting. That's the mindset we need to cultivate together. So grab a pen and notebook if you want to jot things down. Make yourself comfortable wherever you are. Maybe you're at home, maybe you're commuting, maybe you're at the gym. Wherever you are, get comfortable because we're about to embark on a journey that's going to significantly impact your English speaking ability. And remember, every single time you use one of these phrases in your real life, you're building a neural pathway. You're training your brain to access this language naturally. You're building muscle memory with your mouth and your speech patterns. It's not just about learning words, it's about training yourself to become a more confident, more fluent English speaker. All right, I'm genuinely excited to share all of this with you. Let's get started on this amazing journey together. Here we go. Let's start with something fundamental that you'll use multiple times every single day: how to greet people and open conversations effectively. This is where the magic of communication begins. The way you greet someone sets the entire tone for your interaction, whether it's professional, casual, or somewhere in between. First, let's think about the simplest greeting. Most people think the only way to greet someone is by saying hello or hi. But let me tell you, native speakers have so many more ways to greet each other, and these variations actually matter. They help you connect on a more authentic level and make your English sound more natural. One of the most common greetings you'll hear, especially in casual situations, is, "Hey, how's it going?" This is incredibly common among friends, colleagues, and even acquaintances. When someone says this to you, they're not necessarily expecting a detailed answer about how things are actually going. It's more of a friendly acknowledgement. You might respond with something like, "Hey, not bad. Thanks for asking. How about you?" Or simply, "Pretty good. Just keeping busy, you know." Here's what I want you to notice about that exchange. The response doesn't have to be complicated. You're matching the energy and the casualness of the greeting. If someone greets you casually, you respond casually. If they're more formal, you adjust accordingly. This is called code switching, and it's something native speakers do automatically. Another really common greeting, especially in the morning or early afternoon, is "good morning" or "good afternoon." These are slightly more formal than "hey" or "hi," but they're still very friendly and approachable. If someone says "good morning," you might respond with, "Good morning to you too. Hope you're having a great day." Or even simpler, "Morning, how are you today?" Notice how I'm showing you variations. The key to sounding fluent is understanding that there are multiple correct ways to say things, and you get to choose based on the situation and your relationship with the person. This flexibility is what makes English so dynamic and interesting. Now, what about when someone asks, "How are you?" This question is so common that most English learners practice it early on. But here's the thing. How you answer this actually matters more than people realize. native speakers have standard responses that they rotate through. If you're fine, you might say, "I'm doing well, thanks for asking. How are you?" Or, "I'm good, just another day at work. You?" But here's where it gets interesting. Sometimes you might actually be tired or having a rough day, and you can say, "Honestly, I'm a bit tired today. Work has been hectic, but I'm managing. How about you?" This honesty actually makes you seem more genuine and relatable. People appreciate this kind of authentic response. Let me give you another variation. Sometimes people say, "How have you been?" instead of "How are you?" This is often used when you haven't seen someone for a while. The person is asking about your general state over a period of time, not just right now. You might respond, "I've been pretty good, actually. Been keeping busy with work and trying to stay active. It's been a good stretch. How about yourself?" Notice how in these responses, I'm not just answering the question. I'm also adding a little information about myself and then turning it back to them by asking how they are. This is conversational reciprocity. It makes people feel like you're genuinely interested in them, not just going through the motions of politeness. Now let's talk about opening a conversation when you want to share something interesting or exciting. This is where phrases like, "You won't believe what happened to me today," or, "Oh my goodness, guess what I just found out?" These phrases are designed to grab attention and build curiosity. When someone hears these phrases, they immediately tune in because they're intrigued about what you're about to share. For example, if you say, "Guess what? I just got tickets to the concert I've been wanting to see," someone would likely respond enthusiastically, "No way! That's amazing! How did you manage to get them?" You've instantly created engagement and excitement in the conversation. Another phrase that works similarly is, "You're not going to believe this, but..." This sets up the listener to expect something surprising or shocking or funny. Maybe you say, "You're not going to believe this, but I ran into my old teacher at the grocery store today after not seeing them for like 10 years. This immediately creates interest and shows that you have something worth listening to. What about when you want to start a conversation, but you're not sure how? Maybe you're at a social event or you see someone you'd like to talk to. Sometimes the simplest approach is best. You can say, "Hey, I noticed you're reading that book. Is it good?" Or, "I couldn't help but overhear you talking about that trip. Where are you going?" These are natural conversation starters that show genuine interest. Here's a golden rule. People love talking about themselves. If you want to start or maintain a conversation, ask questions about the other person. It shows interest and it keeps the conversation flowing naturally. So phrases like, "That sounds interesting. Can you tell me more about that?" Or, "Oh, really? How did that happen?" are conversation gold. Let me give you a practical scenario. You're at a coffee shop and you strike up a conversation with someone in line. You might say, "This is my first time trying this coffee place. Do you come here often?" They respond, "Yeah, I'm here almost every morning. They make the best lattes." You can then say, "Oh, nice. What's your go-to order? Maybe you can help me figure out what to get." See what happened there? You started with a simple observation or question, they responded, and then you asked a follow-up question that shows you're genuinely interested in their expertise. This is how natural conversations develop. Another important opening phrase is one you use when you're introducing yourself to someone new. You might say, "Hi, I'm Sarah. I don't think we've met before." Or in a more casual setting, "Hey, I'm Alex. What's your name?" These simple introductions are essential in both professional and casual settings. When someone introduces themselves to you, the natural response is to introduce yourself back and then perhaps ask them a question. You might say, "Nice to meet you, Alex. I'm Jordan. So how do you know the host of this party?" This immediately creates a connection and gives you common ground to discuss. What about in professional settings? Opening a conversation in a business context requires slightly more formal language, but it's still fundamentally about the same things. You might say, "Hi, I'm Chris from the marketing department. I've heard great things about your work on the recent project. How's everything going with that?" This opening accomplishes several things. It introduces you, it gives a compliment or acknowledgement, and it asks a question that invites the other person to share. It's respectful, it shows you've paid attention to what they're doing, and it creates an opening for meaningful conversation. Now, what if you're not sure how to approach someone at all? Sometimes you just want to get their attention or signal that you'd like to talk to them. You can use phrases like, "Excuse me, do you have a minute?" Or, "Hey, when you get a moment, I wanted to ask you something." These phrases are respectful and give people a choice about whether they have time to engage. Here's something really important. Timing matters in conversations. If you notice someone is busy or seems focused on something else, you might say, "I don't want to interrupt you, but I had a quick question when you get a chance." This shows respect for their time and attention, and it makes them more likely to actually listen when you do talk to them. Let me wrap up this section with a thought about genuine interest. The most effective conversation openers are those that come from genuine curiosity or friendly intention. If you're asking someone a question because you actually want to know the answer, it shows. If you're just going through the motions, that shows too. So as you're learning these phrases, also cultivate genuine interest in the people you're talking to. Now let's move into something that's absolutely fundamental to good communication: politeness and courtesy. In English-speaking cultures, these expressions are woven throughout all interactions, from casual to formal. Using these phrases shows respect, consideration, and emotional intelligence. Let's start with the most basic: please and thank you. Now, I know this sounds incredibly simple, but let me tell you, the way you use these words matters. When you say, "Can you help me, please?" versus just, "Can you help me?" the addition of please transforms the request from a demand to a respectful ask. It's a small word with big impact. But there's more sophistication we can add. Instead of just saying, "Please help me with this," you might say, "Could you please help me with this?" Or, "Would you mind helping me with this?" These variations add a level of politeness and consideration that's really appreciated. The key is using these phrases conditionally based on your relationship with the person and the situation. If it's your close friend and it's a tiny favor, you might just say, "Hey, can you hand me that?" But if it's someone you don't know as well or it's a bigger ask, you definitely want to say, "Would you mind terribly if I asked you for a favor? Could you possibly help me with this?" Now, responding to thanks. When someone says, "Thank you," you have several options. You can say, "You're welcome," which is the classic response. You can say, "No problem at all," which is more casual and warm. Or you can say, "Anytime, happy to help," which shows genuine kindness. Some people even say, "My pleasure," which sounds a bit formal, but is perfectly appropriate in many situations. What I want you to notice is that your response to gratitude reflects your attitude. If someone thanks you and you say, "You're welcome," with genuine warmth in your voice, it makes them feel good. If you seem annoyed or dismissive, that comes across too. Language carries emotion and intention. Here's another important phrase: "I'm sorry." This is used when you need to apologize for something. But there are different levels of apology, and they match different situations. If you accidentally bump into someone on the street, a quick, "Oh, I'm sorry," is appropriate. If you made a mistake that affected someone's work or caused them inconvenience, you might say, "I sincerely apologize for that. It was completely my fault." Being able to apologize well is actually a sign of maturity and emotional intelligence. When you apologize, it's important to mean it. You might say, "I'm really sorry I was late to our meeting yesterday. I wasn't being respectful of your time, and I want you to know I'll be on time going forward." This shows you understand why your action was problematic and you're committed to changing. Another important politeness phrase is "excuse me." This is used in several different ways. You might say it to get someone's attention, like, "Excuse me, do you know where the restroom is?" You might say it to let someone know you need to pass, like, "Excuse me, I need to get through here." Or you might say it if you need to interrupt politely, like, "Excuse me, sorry to interrupt, but I have a quick question." In British English especially, you'll hear sorry used very frequently as a politeness phrase. Someone might say, "Sorry, could you repeat that?" even if they were listening but didn't quite catch it. This isn't really apologizing for a mistake. It's using sorry as a softener to make the request more polite and less demanding. Now, let's talk about phrases that show consideration for someone's time and feelings. If you want to ask someone a favor, a considerate way is to say, "I don't want to be a bother, but could you possibly help me with something?" This acknowledges that you're asking for something and shows you value their time. Another consideration phrase is, "I appreciate you," or "I appreciate your help." This goes beyond just saying thank you. You're specifically acknowledging that what they did mattered and made a difference to you. People feel valued when you use this kind of language. What about when you need to say no to something? It's important to do this politely. Instead of just saying, "No, I can't," you might say, "I appreciate the offer, but I'm not able to make that work right now." Or, "Thank you for thinking of me, but I have other commitments." This way, you're saying no while still being warm and appreciative. Here's a phrase that's incredibly useful in professional settings. "I'd be happy to help with that." Instead of just saying, "Okay, I'll help," adding the word happy shows you're willing and enthusiastic. It makes a big difference in how the interaction feels. Compare, "I'll do that report," with, "I'd be happy to take on that report." The second one sounds much more positive and cooperative. Let me give you another important phrase. "No worries." This is what you say when someone apologizes to you or when something isn't a big deal. If someone says, "I'm sorry I didn't call you back sooner," you might respond, "No worries at all. I know you've been busy." This phrase quickly reassures the other person that whatever they're worried about is fine. Similarly, "It's all good" is a phrase that means everything is okay and there's no need for concern. Someone might say, "I spilled coffee on your notebook. I'm so sorry." And you could respond, "It's all good. Don't worry about it. It was an accident." This keeps the situation light and friendly. Now, here's something really important about courtesy in English: acknowledging when someone does something nice. You might say, "That was really kind of you," or "I really appreciate your thoughtfulness." When someone remembers something you mentioned before or goes out of their way to help you, acknowledging this makes them feel recognized and valued. In professional contexts, you'll often hear phrases like, "Thank you so much for taking the time to meet with me," or "I really appreciate you making this happen on short notice." These phrases show professionalism and gratitude combined. What about when you're interrupting someone in the middle of something? You might say, "I hate to bother you, but could I ask you something quick?" Or, "I know you're busy, but when you have a minute, could we talk?" These phrases show you're aware that you're imposing on their time, and you're asking permission, not demanding it. Another courtesy phrase that's becoming more common is "my bad" when you make a mistake. It's casual and friendly. You might say, "Oh, my bad. I thought you said Thursday, not Tuesday." It acknowledges the mistake without being overly formal or apologetic. Let me give you a phrase that's really powerful in group situations. "Thanks for understanding." You might say this to someone when they've been flexible or accommodating. Like, "I know this is inconvenient, but I really need to reschedule. Thanks for understanding." Finally, let's talk about closing conversations with courtesy. You might say, "It was really nice chatting with you," or "I really enjoyed talking to you today." These phrases leave people with a positive feeling and make them want to engage with you again in the future. The underlying principle behind all these politeness phrases is respect and consideration. When you use these expressions, you're saying, I respect your time, your feelings, and your autonomy. This creates better relationships and smoother interactions across all areas of life. Let's talk about something we do constantly in modern life, making plans and managing time. These phrases are essential because they help you coordinate with others and express your schedule clearly. One of the most fundamental phrases is, are you free? When you want to see if someone has time to do something with you, this is how you ask. You might say, are you free this weekend? Or, do you have time to grab coffee tomorrow? These simple questions are the starting point for planning almost anything. When someone asks you if you're free, you have a few ways to respond. You might say, yes, I'm free, which is simple and clear. Or you might say, I'm free Saturday afternoon, but not in the morning, which gives them more specific information. Or you might say, I don't think I'm free, but let me check my calendar, which buys you time to figure it out. Here's a phrase that's incredibly useful. Let's set a time. When you want to make firm plans, this phrase helps move the conversation from vague to specific. You might say, this sounds good. When should we meet? Let's set a time. And then you start negotiating actual times that work for both of you. Another important phrase is, what time works for you? This shows flexibility and consideration. Instead of imposing a time on someone, you're giving them input into the decision. They might respond, afternoon works better for me than morning. Or, how about 3 p.m.? This back and forth helps you find times that actually work for both people. When you're trying to find a mutually convenient time, you might say, I'm flexible, whatever works for you. Or, I can make most times work. What's best for you? These phrases show you're easy to work with and considerate of other people's schedules. Now let's talk about phrases for when you can't make plans. You might say, I'd love to, but I have something already scheduled. Or, I'd really like to, but I'm not available then. It's important to be honest about your availability while still being warm and appreciative of the invitation. Sometimes you want to reschedule something. You might say, I need to reschedule our meeting. Can we do it next week instead? Or, I'm so sorry, but I need to push our plans back a few days. Would that work for you? Being upfront about changes to plans is important, and these phrases allow you to do that respectfully. Here's a phrase that's useful when you're running late. I'm running a bit late, but I'll be there in about 10 minutes. This gives the other person a realistic expectation and shows you're still committed to meeting them. Compare this with just not showing up or texting, I'm late with no time frame. The first option shows respect. When confirming plans, you might say, so we're meeting at the coffee shop at 2 p.m. on Saturday, right? This makes sure you're both on the same page about the details. You'd be surprised how many miscommunications happen because people aren't clear about the actual plans. If someone cancels plans, an understanding response might be, no problem at all. Life happens. Let's reschedule for when things are less hectic. This shows you understand that sometimes plans need to change and you're not upset about it. Another useful set of phrases relates to your actual schedule and commitments. You might say, I have a lot on my plate right now, which means you're busy. Or, I'm swamped with work, which means you're overwhelmed with tasks. These phrases help people understand why you might not be able to take on extra things. When you're extremely busy, you might say, I'm completely slammed, or I'm drowning in work. These are strong expressions that show just how busy you are. They help justify why you might be less responsive or unavailable than usual. On the flip side, when you're not busy, you might say, I have some free time this week, or my schedule's pretty open this month. This tells people you're available and flexible, which can be good for making plans. Here's a phrase that's important for workplaces. Let me check my calendar. This buys you a moment to think and make sure you're not agreeing to something you're already committed to. It's a responsible approach to scheduling. When you're discussing long-term planning, you might say, I'm looking ahead at my calendar, or for the next few months, I'm pretty booked. This gives people a sense of your availability over a longer period of time. Another useful phrase is save the date. When you want someone to keep a particular day open for something, this is a casual but effective way to ask. You might say, we're planning a big party in March. Save the date. This tells people to block off that time without making formal plans yet. Here's a phrase for when you want to make sure something is definitely happening. Let's lock this in. You might say this when you're finalizing plans. Like, okay, so we're going hiking next Sunday at 9 a.m. Let's lock this in. It signals that you're making a firm commitment. When you need to cancel something, you might say, I'm really sorry, but I need to cancel our plans. Or, something came up and I'm not going to be able to make it. It's important to be direct about cancellations rather than vague or wishy-washy. In professional settings, you might hear or use phrases like, we'll touch base next week, which means you'll check in with each other, or let's schedule a follow-up meeting, which sets the expectation that you'll have another conversation about this topic. Time management phrases also include things like, I need to get that on my calendar, which means you want to write it down so you don't forget, or I'm going to set a reminder for that, which helps you remember important dates and times. Finally, here's a phrase that brings relief. We're all set. You say this when everything is arranged and confirmed. Like, okay, everyone's confirmed, the restaurant is booked, and we have a reservation at 7 p.m. We're all set for our dinner tonight. This signals that the planning is done and everything is ready. Now, let's talk about one of the most important skills in any language, how to agree, disagree, and keep conversations flowing naturally. This is where you really start to sound like a native speaker, because it's not just about the words, it's about the rhythm and the timing. Let's start with simple agreement. When someone says something you agree with, you can respond in different ways, depending on how strongly you agree and how formal the situation is. The simplest response is just yes, but native speakers rarely stop there. They expand on it. You might say absolutely, which shows strong agreement, or definitely, which also signals you completely agree. There's also for sure, which is more casual. Each of these carries slightly different energy. Then there's I agree, which is more formal and thoughtful. You might say, I completely agree with you on that, which shows you're not just saying yes, but that you've actually considered the point. This phrase works well in discussions where opinions matter. Another great phrase is, that's true. You say this when someone makes a valid point. Like if someone says, the weather really affects how productive I am, you might respond, that's true. I definitely feel more motivated on sunny days. You're acknowledging that what they said is valid and maybe adding your own. What about, I couldn't have said it better myself? This is a more emphatic agreement. You're saying not only do you agree, but you think they said it in the best way possible. It's a compliment wrapped in agreement. Here's something really important. You can agree with part of something while disagreeing with another part. You might say, I see your point about the cost, but I think the quality makes up for it. This is how you navigate disagreements while still being respectful. You're acknowledging what they said before pivoting to your different perspective. Speaking of disagreement, let's talk about how to disagree without being rude or dismissive. This is crucial. You never want to shut someone down by just saying, no, you're wrong, or that doesn't make sense. Instead, you might say, I see what you're saying, but I actually see it differently. This phrase, I see what you're saying, but it shows you've heard and considered what the person said, but you have a different perspective. You might continue with, I think there are other factors to consider, or, from my experience, it's a bit different than that. Another thoughtful way to disagree is, I respectfully disagree, or I don't quite see it that way. These phrases are more formal, so you'd use them in professional or more serious discussions. They show you value the other person's input, even if you don't agree. What if someone says something you absolutely don't agree with? You might say, I hear you, but I have to respectfully push back on that. Or, I understand your point, but I'd actually argue the opposite. This acknowledges their position while clearly stating yours. Here's a phrase that's useful when you're not entirely sure about something. I'm not entirely sure about that, or I'm not completely convinced. This shows intellectual honesty. You're saying you hear them, but you're not fully on board yet. When you want to keep the conversation flowing and show you're engaged, you use what I call connector phrases. These are phrases that bridge one thought to the next. For example, that's interesting shows you're following along. Tell me more about that shows genuine curiosity. Another connector is, what do you mean by that? This keeps the conversation moving and shows you want to understand more deeply. You're not just passively listening, you're actively engaged. Here's a phrase that keeps conversations positive. That makes sense. You say this when someone explains something and you understand it. It's affirming and moves the conversation forward. Like, oh, that makes sense. I didn't think of it that way. When you want to add to what someone said, you might use phrases like, and another thing, or along those lines, or building on what you said. These phrases show you're expanding on an idea they brought up, not completely changing the subject. What about when you realize the other person has a good point you hadn't considered? You might say, you know what, you're right about that, or I hadn't thought of it that way. That's a good point. This shows flexibility and openness, which people really respect. Here's a useful phrase for disagreements that are getting heated or tense. I think we just see things differently, and that's okay. This acknowledges that you have different perspectives, but you're not going to let it damage the relationship. It brings the temperature down. When you want to explore an idea without committing to it fully, you might say, that's an interesting perspective, or I hadn't considered that angle. You're showing interest and openness without necessarily agreeing. Sometimes you want to verify that you understand someone correctly. You might say, so what you're saying is, and then restate what you understood. This is super useful because it gives them a chance to clarify if you misunderstood. Here's a phrase that can soften disagreement. I appreciate your perspective, but this acknowledges that they have a valid viewpoint, even if you don't agree, before you share your different take. It's respectful and keeps the conversation collaborative. When conversations are going well and you want to express genuine enthusiasm about what someone said, you might say, I love that idea, or that's brilliant. These phrases encourage continued discussion and make people feel valued. Another important skill is knowing when to ask for someone's opinion. You might say, what do you think about that? Or, I'd love to hear your perspective. This invites them into the conversation and shows you value their input. Finally, here's a phrase that wraps up a discussion nicely. Well, I think we've covered a lot here. Or, that's a lot to think about. This signals that you're ready to move on or take time to process what was discussed. One of the most beautiful aspects of human communication is the ability to give genuine compliments and express appreciation. These are phrases that make people feel valued, seen, and appreciated. Let me teach you how to do this authentically. The foundation of a good compliment is sincerity. You can tell when someone is being genuine versus when they're just saying something nice. So the first rule is, only give compliments you actually mean. That said, there are lots of things worth complimenting in people, and you might just need some language to express it. Starting with appearance compliments, you might say, "That color really suits you," or "You look great today." The key with appearance compliments is to make them about what's flattering, not about their body or anything that could be misinterpreted. So instead of commenting on their body shape, you might say, "That style looks amazing on you." For work or skill-based compliments, you might say, "You did an amazing job on that presentation," or "I was really impressed by how you handled that situation." These compliments acknowledge effort and success, which makes people feel genuinely appreciated. What about, "You have a real talent for that"? This phrase acknowledges that someone has a natural ability or gift for something. It's different from complimenting a specific achievement. It's about recognizing their underlying strengths. Here's a phrase that acknowledges someone's character. "I really admire your kindness," or "I admire how thoughtful you are." When you compliment someone's character or values, it hits differently than surface-level compliments. It shows you see who they are on the inside. Sometimes you want to compliment someone's growth or improvement. You might say, "I've seen such growth in you," or "You've really improved at that. I'm impressed." This acknowledges that someone is getting better, which is motivating and encouraging. What about complimenting someone's perspective or ideas? You might say, "That's a really thoughtful way to look at it," or "I hadn't considered that angle. That's brilliant." When you value someone's thinking, they feel heard and respected. Here's a phrase that expresses genuine appreciation. "I really appreciate what you did for me," or "I can't thank you enough for your help." These go beyond just saying thank you. They express the depth of your gratitude. When someone helps you or supports you through something difficult, you might say, "You were really there for me when I needed it," or "Your support meant more to me than you know." This acknowledges their importance in your life. Here's a compliment that works in many situations. Here's a compliment that works in many situations. "You're really easy to talk to," or "You're such a good listener." These personality-based compliments make people feel comfortable and valued. What if you want to compliment someone's sense of humor? You might say, "You always know how to make me laugh," or "You have such a great sense of humor." Humor is important in relationships, and complimenting it shows you appreciate this side of them. When someone has done something nice, you might acknowledge it by saying, "That was really generous of you," or "You're such a kind person." This reinforces their positive behavior and makes them more likely to continue acting kindly. Here's a phrase that works when you're genuinely impressed. "I'm in awe of what you accomplished," or "That's incredible." These strong expressions of admiration make a real impact and show you're truly impressed. What about when someone is brave or takes a risk? You might say, "That took a lot of courage," or "I admire your bravery." This acknowledges that what they did required strength or vulnerability. Sometimes you want to notice small things that people do well. You might say, "I really noticed how patient you were with that," or "The way you handled that was perfect." Small, specific compliments often mean more than generic ones because they show you're paying attention. Here's a compliment that shows you see someone's potential. "I think you could really excel at this," or "You have so much potential." This is encouraging and helps people believe in themselves. When someone is being authentic or vulnerable with you, you might say, "I really respect your honesty," or "I appreciate you being real with me." This validates their willingness to be genuine. What about complimenting someone's resilience? You might say, "You're one of the strongest people I know," or "I'm amazed at how you keep moving forward." These compliments acknowledge someone's ability to handle difficult situations. Here's a phrase that expresses genuine connection. "You've really made a difference in my life," or "You mean a lot to me." These deep, meaningful compliments strengthen relationships significantly. Finally, Here's an important rule about compliments. Believe them. Don't just give empty praise. When you genuinely recognize and honor something good about another person, your words have power. The most impactful compliments are the ones that come from a place of true appreciation and recognition. Now let's talk about how to express surprise, excitement, and emotion in ways that sound natural and authentic. These phrases are essential because language isn't just about exchanging information, it's about connecting emotionally. Let's start with surprise. When you hear something unexpected, there are several ways to react. The simplest is just, "Really?" This single word, delivered with the right intonation, communicates surprise and invites the person to continue. But native speakers have so many more ways to express surprise. You might say, "No way," when something is shocking or unexpected. Like if someone says, "I'm moving to Australia next month," you might exclaim, "No way! That's amazing! When did you decide this?" The "no way" shows surprise while also showing interest. Another expression is, "I can't believe it." This works when something is surprising or seems too good to be true. You might say, "I can't believe you got the job. Congratulations." The emotion in your voice makes this authentic. What about, "That's incredible," or "That's amazing"? These phrases show surprise combined with positive emotion. They work when something surprising is also wonderful, like, "Oh my gosh, you're engaged. That's incredible." Here's a phrase for when something is surprising and hard to believe. "You're joking, right?" Or, "Are you serious?" These are used when you're pretty sure someone is pulling your leg, but you want confirmation. When something is shocking or a bit alarming, you might say, "Wow, I didn't see that coming," or "That came out of nowhere." You're expressing surprise that something happened when you didn't expect it. What about surprise combined with concern? You might say, "Oh no, what happened?" Or, "Wait, really? Are you okay?" These phrases show surprise, but also care and concern for the person. Now let's talk about expressing excitement. When you're genuinely excited about something, you might say, "I'm so excited," or "I can't wait." The enthusiasm in your voice and the exclamation point really matter here. Enthusiasm is contagious. You might also say, "This is going to be amazing," or "I'm pumped for this." These phrases show genuine enthusiasm and anticipation. They work when you're looking forward to something. What about when something exciting happens? You might say, "Oh my gosh, this is the best day ever," or "I'm on top of the world right now." These expressive statements show genuine joy and excitement. Here's a phrase that shows infectious excitement. "You have to hear this," or "Wait till you hear what happened." These set up what you're about to share as exciting news, and they build anticipation. When you're excited about something someone else did, you might say, "That's awesome," or "Good for you," with genuine warmth. This shows you're genuinely happy about their success or good fortune. What about expressing disappointment? You might say, "Oh no, that's unfortunate," or "I'm sorry to hear that." These phrases show empathy when something disappointing happens to someone else. When you're disappointed in yourself or a situation, you might say, "Ugh, I was really looking forward to that," or "I'm disappointed, but I'll get over it." Here's a phrase for when something unexpected happens that might be negative. "Well, that's not what I expected," or "That didn't go the way I planned." You're acknowledging the situation without being overly dramatic. Now let's talk about expressing sadness or empathy. When someone shares something difficult, you might say, "I'm sorry you're going through that," or "That sounds really tough." This validates their feelings and shows you care. What about, "I'm here for you," or "Let me know if you need anything"? These phrases offer support and let someone know they're not alone in whatever they're dealing with. When someone is grieving or dealing with loss, you might say, "I'm so sorry for your loss," or "My heart goes out to you." These are compassionate phrases that acknowledge their pain. Here's a phrase that shows you understand someone's struggle. "That must be really difficult," or "I can imagine how frustrated you must feel." You're empathizing and acknowledging their emotion. Sometimes you want to express frustration yourself. You might say, "I'm so frustrated right now," or "This is really aggravating." Being honest about negative emotions is healthy and helps others understand where you're coming from. What about expressing anxiety or worry? You might say, "I'm a bit nervous about that," or "I've been anxious about this meeting." This vulnerability helps others understand your emotional state. When you want to show you're stressed, you might say, "I'm overwhelmed right now," or "I'm stressed about everything I have to do." Acknowledging stress helps others know you might not be at your best. Here's a phrase that shows resignation or acceptance. "It is what it is," or "I'm just going to accept it and move on." This shows you're processing a situation and choosing to let go of worry about it. When you're proud of someone, you might say, "I'm so proud of you," or "You should be so proud of yourself." These phrases celebrate achievements and character development. What about expressing love or deep care? You might say, "I love you," or "You mean everything to me." These are powerful statements that strengthen bonds. What about expressing love or deep care? You might say, "I love you," or "You mean everything to me." These are powerful statements that strengthen bonds. One of the most important skills for English learners is knowing how to ask for clarification when you don't understand something. This is not a weakness, it's actually a strength. It shows you're paying attention and you care about understanding fully. The most basic way to ask for clarification is, "Can you say that again?" or "Could you repeat that?" This is straightforward and direct. When someone speaks and you don't catch it, this is the simplest response. But there are more specific ways to ask for clarification. You might say, "Sorry, I didn't quite catch that," or "I missed that. Could you repeat it?" These phrases acknowledge that you were listening, but something didn't land properly. What about when you understood the words but not the meaning? You might say, "I understand the words, but could you explain what you mean?" Or, "That doesn't quite make sense to me. Can you clarify?" These phrases show you're not understanding the concept, not the language itself. Here's a phrase that's useful when something is confusing. "So what you're saying is," and then restate what you understood. This gives them a chance to correct you if you misunderstood. When you want to slow someone down because they're speaking too fast, you might say, "Could you speak a bit slower, please?" Or, "You're going kind of fast. Can you slow down a bit?" This helps you keep up without feeling lost. What about when you want to check if you understand correctly? You might say, "If I understand correctly," and then paraphrase what they said. This shows you're trying to understand and gives them a chance to confirm or correct. Here's a useful phrase. "Could you give me an example?" When someone is explaining something abstract or complicated, asking for a concrete example often helps. Examples make things clearer. Sometimes you want to understand someone's intention or motivation. You might say, "Why are you asking?" or "What do you mean by that?" These questions help you understand not just the words, but the purpose behind them. What about when something someone said seems contradictory to something they said before? You might say, "Wait, earlier you said something different. Can you clarify?" This shows you're listening closely and thinking critically. Here's a phrase for when you need a simple, direct answer. "Can you just tell me straight up what you mean?" This is casual and honest. You're saying you want the bottom line, not complicated explanation. When you're confused about the overall point of what someone is saying, you might say, "I'm getting lost. Can you start over?" Or, "Can you walk me through this step by step?" These phrases ask for clearer organization. What if something doesn't match what you thought? You might say, "Wait, I thought you said," and then cite what you thought was said. This gives them a chance to correct any misunderstanding. Here's a phrase that's useful in professional settings. "Could you put that in writing?" When you want a record of something, or when you're worried you might misunderstand verbal instruction, asking for it in writing is completely reasonable. When someone uses jargon or technical language you don't understand, you might say, "I'm not familiar with that term. What does it mean?" This shows you're willing to learn and you're not pretending to understand something you don't. What about when you want to understand someone's perspective? You might say, "Help me understand where you're coming from," or "Can you explain your thinking?" This shows genuine interest in their viewpoint. Here's a phrase that shows you're actively listening. So basically, what you're saying is, this is a form of paraphrasing that shows you're trying to grasp the essence of what they said. When you want clarification about something you find surprising or confusing, you might say, "Really? How did that happen?" Or, "That surprises me. Can you tell me more about that?" These questions express surprise while asking for more information. What about when you're confused by someone's behavior or reaction? You might say, "I don't understand why you're upset," or "Help me understand your reaction." This is asking for emotional or behavioral clarification. Here's an important phrase. "I want to make sure I understand correctly." This phrase signals that you care about understanding, and it often makes people patient in explaining things again. Finally, after someone clarifies something, it's good to confirm, "Okay, so now I understand. You're saying," this shows the clarification worked and demonstrates your understanding to the other person. Let's talk about something that happens to everyone: making mistakes, needing to apologize, and handling difficult or awkward moments in conversations. These skills are crucial for maintaining good relationships. First, let's talk about apologizing well. A basic apology is, "I'm sorry," but there's so much more you can do to make an apology meaningful and genuine. You might say, "I'm really sorry I was late to our meeting. I wasn't being respectful of your time, and I want you to know I'll be more careful in the future." Notice what happened there. I didn't just say, "Sorry." I acknowledged what I did wrong, I explained why it was wrong, and I made a commitment to change. That's a real apology. Sometimes you need to apologize for something you said. You might say, "I'm sorry for how I spoke to you earlier. That was harsh, and I didn't mean to hurt your feelings. Can we talk about it?" This acknowledges the impact of your words. What about when you're partly wrong, but there are two sides? You might say, "I'm sorry for my part in this argument. I could have handled it better." This shows you take responsibility for your portion without necessarily accepting full blame. Here's a phrase that softens mistakes. "I made a mistake, and I'm sorry. How can I fix it?" This shows you're taking responsibility and you're willing to take action to repair the situation. When someone is upset because of something you did, you might say, "I hear that I hurt you, and that bothers me. I want to make it right." This shows you care about their feelings, not just defending yourself. What about when you realize mid-conversation that you said something wrong? You might say, "Wait, that came out wrong. What I meant to say is," this correction shows you care about clear communication. Here's a phrase for when you've been wrong about something factual. "Actually, I was mistaken. You were right about that." Being willing to admit when you're wrong is a sign of strength, not weakness. When something awkward happens, like you accidentally interrupt someone, you might say, "Oh gosh, sorry, go ahead," or "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off." A quick acknowledgement helps smooth over the awkwardness. What if you misunderstand someone and your misunderstanding leads to an awkward moment? You might say, "Oh, I completely misunderstood. That makes so much more sense now. Sorry about that." Clearing up misunderstandings quickly helps move past awkwardness. Here's a phrase that shows vulnerability and accountability. "I dropped the ball on that. I should have." This phrase takes responsibility and acknowledges failure. Here's a phrase that shows vulnerability and accountability. "I dropped the ball on that. I should have." This phrase takes responsibility and acknowledges failure. What about when you need to set a boundary but don't want to be harsh? You might say, "I appreciate your input, but I need to make my own decision on this." Or, "I understand your concern, but I'm going to handle it this way." You're being respectful but firm. Here's a phrase for when someone says something hurtful. "That hurt my feelings," or "That comment was hurtful to me." Being honest about the impact of someone's words helps them understand the consequences. When you're addressing a pattern of behavior that's bothering you, you might say, "I've noticed this happening a few times, and it's starting to bother me. Can we talk about it?" This is honest and direct without being accusatory. What about when you want to give someone negative feedback, but keep the relationship intact? You might say, "I appreciate you, and I want to give you some feedback that I think could help. Is now a good time?" This shows respect and asks permission. Here's a phrase that acknowledges difficulty. "This is uncomfortable for me to bring up, but it's important." This honesty about your own discomfort can make difficult conversations less tense. When someone is upset and you don't know why, asking might help. You could say, "It seems like something's wrong. Is everything okay? Do you want to talk about it?" This shows you care and gives them a chance to open up. What about when you need to deliver bad news? You might say, "I have some bad news, and I'm not sure how to say this, but..." This honest, vulnerable approach often softens the blow. Here's a phrase for when you're disagreeing but want to keep things friendly. "I love you, and I disagree with you on this. I hope we can work through it." This shows the relationship is more important than being right. When someone apologizes to you and you want to be gracious, you might say, "I appreciate you saying that. Thank you for owning it. I forgive you." This shows you accept their apology and you're moving forward. Finally, here's an important principle. Difficult moments are opportunities to strengthen relationships if handled well. They show that you care enough to address issues, and they demonstrate your character through how you handle them. Now let's get practical and talk about phrases you use in specific real-world situations. These are phrases that will help you navigate shopping, dining, traveling, and other everyday activities confidently. Let's start with shopping. When you enter a store, a salesperson might ask, "Can I help you find anything?" You have several options for responding. You might say, "I'm just looking, thanks," which signals you're browsing. Or you might say, "Actually, I'm looking for," and then describe what you want. When you want help finding something, you might say, "Excuse me, could you help me find something?" Or, "Do you have this in a different size?" These are polite requests for assistance that salespeople expect and appreciate. What about when you want to know the price? You might ask, "How much is this?" Or, "What's the price on this?" These are simple and direct questions that shopkeepers hear constantly. Here's a phrase that's useful when you're considering whether to buy something. "I need to think about it," or "Can I have a few minutes to decide?" This is honest and gives you time to consider without pressure. When you're ready to buy something, you might say, "I'll take this," or "I'll take 2 of these, please." This is clear and direct. You're signaling you want to purchase. What about at the checkout? After the cashier rings things up, they usually say, "Your total is," and you might say, "Can I use a card?" or "I'm paying with cash." You're clarifying your payment method. Here's a phrase that's useful if something isn't working or there's an issue. "This doesn't seem right," or "I think there's a problem with this." If something is broken or the price doesn't match, letting the cashier know is important. When you're trying on clothes, you might ask a salesperson, "Does this fit okay?" or "How does this look?" If something doesn't fit, you might say, "This is too tight," or "This is too loose." Being specific helps them help you better. What about when you want a different size or color? You might say, "Do you have this in a larger size?" or "Do you have this in black?" These are common requests in stores. Here's a phrase for when something is too expensive. "That's a bit more than I was hoping to spend." Or, "Do you have anything more affordable?" This is honest without being offensive. Now let's talk about dining at restaurants. When you arrive, a host might greet you with, "How many in your party?" You respond, "It's just 2 of us," or "There are 4 of us." This tells them how many people to seat. When you're seated, a waiter might ask, "Can I start you off with something to drink?" You might say, "Water for me, please," or "I'll have a coffee." You're ordering your first beverage. When you're ready to order, you might say, "I'm ready to order." Or you just look up and make eye contact to signal you're ready. The waiter will then ask what you'd like. When ordering, you might say, "I'd like the grilled salmon with rice, please," or "Can I get the pasta with marinara sauce?" These are standard ways to order food. What about dietary restrictions or preferences? You might say, "I'm vegetarian, so does this dish have meat?" Or, "Can I get that without onions?" Restaurants expect these kinds of questions and adjustments. Here's a phrase for when you want a recommendation. "What would you recommend?" Or, "What's good here?" Waiters love helping customers choose and often have favorites. What about if you're not ready to order? You might say, "I need a few more minutes, please." Or, "Could you give us another moment?" This is perfectly acceptable, and waiters understand people need time to decide. When your food arrives, a waiter might ask, "How is everything?" You can respond, "Everything looks delicious, thanks," or "It's great." If something's wrong, you might say, "Actually, I ordered medium rare, not well done. Could you have the chef redo this?" When your food arrives, a waiter might ask, "How is everything?" You can respond, "Everything looks delicious, thanks," or "It's great." If something's wrong, you might say, "Actually, I ordered medium rare, not well done. Could you have the chef redo this?" When you're done eating and your plate is being cleared, you might say, "Everything was delicious, thank you," or "That was wonderful." This compliments the restaurant and shows appreciation. What about asking for a to-go box? You might say, "Could I get a box for leftovers?" Or, "Can I take the rest home?" This is common and expected in many restaurants. Now let's talk about traveling. When you're at an airport or train station, you might ask, "Where's the gate for flight 234?" Or, "Which platform is the train to Paris?" You're looking for specific location information. Here's a phrase that's useful when you're lost. "Excuse me, I'm trying to get to," and then state your destination. "Can you point me in the right direction?" People generally want to help travelers. What about when you need directions on the street? You might stop someone and say, "Excuse me, how do I get to the museum?" Or, "Is this the right direction for the train station?" These are simple, direct questions. When you're staying somewhere and need help, you might tell the front desk, "I'm in room 308 and the shower isn't working. Could someone send maintenance?" This clearly explains the problem. Here's a phrase for when you need information about transportation. "How do I get to the airport?" Or, "What's the best way to get downtown?" Locals usually know and are happy to share. What about when you're checking out of a hotel? You might say, "I'm checking out today. Can we process the checkout?" The front desk will handle the final bill and return your key. Finally, here's a universal phrase that works in most situations. "Could you help me?" Most people are kind enough to help when you ask directly and respectfully. Let's talk about how to manage conversations skillfully. This means knowing when to speak, when to listen, how to keep things flowing naturally, and how to end conversations gracefully. One important skill is knowing how to take turns in conversation. When you want to speak, you might wait for a natural pause and then say, "I have something I want to add," or you might simply jump in gently. But one thing to avoid is interrupting constantly. That's considered rude in most English-speaking cultures. If you do accidentally interrupt, you might quickly say, "Oh, sorry, go ahead," and let them finish their thought. This shows respect and courtesy. What about when you want to steer the conversation in a new direction? You might say, "That's interesting. Speaking of which," or "By the way, what I really wanted to talk about." This transitions smoothly rather than abruptly changing the subject. Here's a phrase that's useful when you want to refocus a conversation that's gotten off track. "Anyway, back to what I was saying." Or, "So, where were we?" This brings things back to the main point without being rude about it. When someone is monopolizing the conversation and not giving you space to speak, you might gently say, "That's really interesting. I have a question about something you mentioned earlier." Or, "Can I jump in for a second?" This asserts your right to participate. What about when you're in a group conversation and you want to include someone who hasn't spoken? You might say, "What do you think about this?" Or, "I'd love to hear your perspective." This invites quieter people into the discussion. Here's a phrase for when you disagree but don't want to derail the conversation. "I see your point, but let me offer a different perspective." This acknowledges what they said while introducing your viewpoint. When a conversation is getting too personal or intimate and you want to maintain boundaries, you might say, "I appreciate you sharing that, but I'm not comfortable going into detail about that." Or, "That's a bit personal for me right now." Setting boundaries is healthy. What about when someone brings up a sensitive topic you don't want to discuss? You might say, "I'd rather not talk about that." Or, "Can we change the subject?" Being direct is better than being evasive. Here's a phrase for when you need to leave a conversation. "I really need to get going, but I've enjoyed talking with you." Or, "I don't want to interrupt you, but I have to run." This is polite and honest. When you want to end a conversation without being abrupt, you might say, "Well, I should let you go," or "I don't want to keep you. You probably have things to do." This gives the other person an exit gracefully. What about in a work context where someone keeps talking and you need to wrap up? You might say, "This has been really helpful. I'm going to head back to work, but let's touch base next week." This wraps things up while suggesting future contact. Here's a phrase that shows you've enjoyed an interaction. "This was really nice. I'm glad we got to talk." Or, "I really appreciated this conversation." This leaves the other person feeling good about the exchange. When you're saying goodbye, you might say, "Take care," "See you later," "Talk soon," or "I'll be in touch." These are natural ways to end a conversation. What about when you want to make plans before ending a conversation? You might say, "Hey, we should do this again sometime," or "Let's grab coffee next month." This leaves the door open for future connection. Here's a phrase for ending phone conversations. "Okay, I'll let you go now." Or, "I'm going to head out, but thanks for calling." This signals the end is near. When you're leaving a gathering or event, you might say to people, "It was great seeing you," or "Thanks for inviting me. I had a wonderful time." This makes people feel good about including you. What about when you're ending a professional email or message? You might write, "Looking forward to hearing from you," or "Let's talk soon." This keeps things positive and forward-looking. Finally, here's an important skill. Remembering that conversations are about connection, not just information exchange. The best conversations end with both people feeling heard, valued, and happy to have talked. Let's talk about how to express your opinions and perspectives in ways that sound thoughtful, respectful, and authentic. This is important because opinion sharing is a huge part of human conversation. The foundation of expressing opinion well is to be respectful of other perspectives while still being true to what you believe. One way to start is with phrases like, "in my opinion," or "from my perspective." These signal that you're offering a viewpoint, not an absolute truth. You might say, "I think what happened was," or "it seems to me like." These phrases are less assertive than stating something as fact. They leave room for dialogue and differing viewpoints. What about when you have a strong opinion? You might say, "I really believe that," or "I'm convinced that." These phrases show conviction while still being respectful. Here's a useful phrase for opinions. "Based on what I've seen," or "from my experience." This grounds your opinion in actual observation or lived experience, which makes it more credible. When you're not completely sure, but you're leaning toward an opinion, you might say, "I'm not entirely sure, but I think," or "I could be wrong, but it seems like." This shows intellectual humility. What about when you want to express what you feel rather than what you think? You might say, "I feel like this is unfair," or "I get the sense that something's wrong." Feelings are valid and worth expressing. Here's a phrase that acknowledges complexity. "I see both sides, but I lean toward." This shows you understand there are multiple perspectives while still sharing where you stand. When you want to express a controversial opinion, you might frame it carefully. "This might be unpopular, but I think," or "I know some people disagree with me on this, but I believe." This acknowledges that your opinion isn't universal. What about when you're reacting to something you heard? You might say, "That's an interesting point, and I hadn't thought of it that way," or "I disagree with that." You're responding thoughtfully to what was shared. Here's a phrase for when you want to explore an idea. "What if?" or "Have you ever thought about?" These questions invite dialogue rather than shutting it down. When you're sharing an unpopular opinion but standing by it, you might say, "I know this isn't what most people think, but here's why I believe this." This acknowledges the unpopularity while explaining your reasoning. What about expressing skepticism? You might say, "I'm not sure I buy that," or "I have my doubts about that." You're expressing doubt in a respectful way. Here's a phrase that's useful in professional settings. "I'd like to present an alternative perspective," or "I'd like to offer a different viewpoint." This frames your opinion as a contribution to discussion. When you're building on someone else's opinion, you might say, "That's a good point," and "I'd add that," or "I agree with you, and I take it further by saying." You're affirming and expanding. What about when you realize your opinion is changing? You might say, "You know what? I've never thought about it that way before. I think you might be right." Or, "I'm actually changing my mind about this." This shows growth and openness. Here's a phrase for when you have evidence for your opinion. "This is backed up by," or "the research shows that." This adds credibility to your perspective. When you're expressing an opinion about someone else's behavior, you want to be careful. You might say, "I noticed you did this, and I wondered if," or "I might be reading this wrong, but it seemed like." This invites conversation rather than accusation. What about expressing opinions about art, music, or entertainment? You might say, "I really liked that movie. I thought the acting was great," or "That book wasn't for me, but I can see why others would enjoy it." This is subjective, and there's room for different tastes. Finally, here's the golden rule. Opinions are invitations to dialogue, not statements of fact. When you express an opinion, you're opening a conversation. You're not trying to convince someone you're right. You're sharing how you see something and inviting their perspective. One of the most beautiful aspects of human connection is the ability to help each other. Let's talk about phrases for offering help asking for help, and collaborating with others. Starting with offering help, the most basic way is to simply ask, "Can I help you?" or "Do you need help with that?" These straightforward questions open the door for someone to say yes. What about being more specific? You might say, "Do you need help carrying that?" or "Would you like me to look over your resume?" Being specific about what kind of help you're offering makes it easier for someone to accept. Here's a phrase that shows willingness. "I'd be happy to help," or "I'm glad to help. What do you need?" This expresses genuine enthusiasm about offering help. When you want to volunteer for a task, you might say, "I'll take care of that," or "I can handle that for you." You're claiming responsibility and showing you're reliable. What about when you see someone struggling? You might say, "It looks like you could use a hand. Let me help." Or, "You look overwhelmed. How can I support you?" This shows awareness and compassion. Here's a phrase that's useful in work situations. "I'm happy to take some of that off your plate." Or, "Let me handle this so you can focus on what you need to do." This shows you're thinking about the big picture. When you want to ask for help, the basic phrase is, "Can you help me?" But there are more specific ways. You might say, "I could really use your help with something." Or, "Would you have time to help me with this?" What about being vulnerable in asking for help? You might say, "I'm struggling with this and I could use some help." Or, "I don't know how to handle this alone. Could you help me?" This honesty often makes people more willing to help. Here's a phrase that acknowledges someone's specific expertise. "You're really good at this. Could you help me?" This flatters them while asking for help, making them feel valued. When you're asking for support during a difficult time, you might say, "I'm going through something tough and I could really use some support." Or, "Could you just listen while I work through this?" You're being specific about what kind of help you need. What about asking for advice? You might say, "I trust your judgment. What do you think I should do?" Or, "I'd really value your perspective on this." You're asking for their input specifically. Here's a phrase for when you're asking someone to check your work. "Could you look over this and give me feedback?" Or, "I'd appreciate if you could review this." You're asking for critical input to help you improve. When you're collaborating with someone on a project, you might say, "Let's work together on this," or "How should we divide the work?" You're setting up partnership and fairness. What about expressing appreciation for someone's help? You might say, "I couldn't have done this without you," or "Thank you so much for your help. It made a real difference." This acknowledges their contributions significantly. Here's a phrase for when you want to follow up after someone helped you. "I wanted to thank you again for helping me with that. It really made a difference." Or, "I appreciate what you did for me." This shows sustained gratitude. When you want to return the favor, you might say, "I'd love to return the favor," or "Is there anything I can do for you?" This keeps relationship reciprocal. What about when you're in a situation where you need to ask for multiple things? You might say, "I know I'm asking a lot, but could you also?" This acknowledges the ask is significant while still requesting help. Here's a phrase that shows you're thinking of someone's capacity. "I don't want to overload you, but could you help with this?" This shows consideration for their time and energy. Finally, remember that asking for help is not weakness. It's actually a strength because it shows self-awareness, vulnerability, and trust in others. And offering help without expectation of return is one of the most human things we can do. Now I want to talk about something that ties everything we've discussed together, building genuine comfort and confidence in your English communication. This isn't just about learning phrases, it's about developing real fluency. The first thing to understand is that fluency is not about perfection. Native speakers make mistakes constantly. They use incorrect grammar sometimes. They search for words occasionally, but they keep communicating. They don't let small errors derail the conversation. Think about how you speak in your native language. You don't think about grammar rules while you're talking. You don't pause to search for words constantly. You're in flow. That's what we're aiming for in English, too. The way to develop this flow is through consistent practice with real language in real situations. That's why I encourage you to take the phrases you're learning and actually use them, not just in your head, not just in writing, but in actual conversations with real people. The way to develop this flow is through consistent practice with real language in real situations. That's why I encourage you to take the phrases you're learning and actually use them, not just in your head, not just in writing, but in actual conversations with real people. As you practice, you'll start to notice something amazing happening. These phrases that felt foreign and awkward at first start to feel natural. Your brain is building neural pathways, and your mouth is getting used to forming these sounds and patterns. Let me give you a concrete strategy. Each week, pick 3 new phrases from what we've discussed. Write them down, practice saying them out loud multiple times. Then, find ways to use them in your actual communication that week. By the end of the week, you'll have internalized them. Another important aspect of building confidence is understanding that making mistakes is not failure. It's information. When you make a mistake, you learn. You adjust, you try again. That's how all learning happens. I want you to develop what I call comfortable vulnerability. This means being willing to be uncertain, to ask questions, to admit you don't understand something, to make mistakes, all while trusting that you're in the process of getting better. Think about listening to English speakers. Whether it's podcasts, movies, YouTube videos, or actual conversations, pay attention to how they use these phrases. Notice the rhythm, the intonation, the way they blend words together. Your brain is absorbing this naturally, even if you're not consciously studying it. Here's a powerful practice. Find content in English that you genuinely enjoy. Maybe it's a podcast about something you're interested in, or a YouTube channel about your hobby, or movies or shows you like. Consume this content regularly. Your mind will absorb the language patterns while you're entertained. Another confidence builder is to speak to yourself. Yes, you heard that right. Talk to yourself in English. Narrate what you're doing. Have conversations with yourself. This builds fluency without the pressure of another person listening. Another confidence builder is to speak to yourself. Yes, you heard that right. Talk to yourself in English. Narrate what you're doing. Have conversations with yourself. This builds fluency without the pressure of another person listening. I also want you to embrace what I call good enough. You don't need to say everything perfectly. You just need to communicate clearly enough that people understand. Often, good enough is actually excellent because it's authentic and natural. Here's something that might sound counterintuitive. Stop translating in your head. This is a trap that many learners fall into. Instead of translating from your native language to English, try to think directly in English. It takes practice, but it's a game changer. Set small, achievable goals for yourself. Maybe your goal is to have a 5-minute conversation in English this week, or to speak a new phrase every day, or to listen to a podcast for 30 minutes. Small, consistent goals lead to real progress. Find an accountability partner. This could be another English learner, a friend who speaks English, or even a teacher. Having someone you're working toward improving with makes it more fun and keeps you motivated. Remember that progress isn't always linear. Some days you'll feel fluent and confident. Other days you'll feel like you're going backward. This is normal. These natural fluctuations are part of the learning process. What about dealing with anxiety about speaking? It's normal to feel nervous. Even people who are excellent speakers sometimes feel nervous. The key is to speak anyway, despite the nervousness. You'll be surprised at how much the nervousness decreases with each conversation. Finally, celebrate your progress. Really, every time you successfully communicate in English, especially if you used one of the phrases we discussed, that's worth celebrating. You're building a new skill. Be proud of yourself. Now I want to bring everything we've discussed together by showing you complete conversations that use many of the phrases we've learned. These are real-world scenarios that you'll likely encounter. Let's start with a scenario. You're at a networking event and you see someone standing alone. You want to start a conversation. You approach and say, "Hi, I'm Lilly. I don't think we've met before. Are you enjoying the event?" They respond, "Hey, nice to meet you. I'm Marcus. Yeah, it's pretty good so far, though I'm still getting the hang of events like this." You say, "I know what you mean. They can feel a bit overwhelming. What brings you here? Are you in this industry?" Notice what happened. You introduced yourself, asked an engaging question, acknowledged their comment, and then asked a follow-up that invites them to share. This is conversational flow at its best. Here's another scenario. Your friend tells you some good news. They say, "You won't believe it. I just got the job I've been hoping for." You respond enthusiastically, "No way! That's amazing! Congratulations! Tell me everything. When do you start?" They say, "I'm still in shock. It all happened so fast." You respond, "That must feel incredible. You must be so excited. You deserve this. I know how hard you worked for it." See how you're using phrases like, "No way! That's amazing! Tell me everything!" and expressing genuine enthusiasm? You're making them feel valued and excited about sharing their good news with you. Let me give you a scenario where you're asking for help. You're struggling with a project at work. You go to a coworker and say, "Hey, do you have a few minutes? I could really use your help with something." They say, "Sure, what's going on?" You explain, "I'm stuck on this analysis and I'm not sure how to approach it." "You're really good at this stuff. Would you mind taking a look?" They respond, "I'd be happy to help. Let's sit down and work through it together." You say, "Thank you so much. I really appreciate this. You're a lifesaver." Notice how you started by asking if they had time, clearly stated what you needed, complimented their skills, asked specifically for help, and then expressed gratitude. This is respectful and effective. Here's a more difficult scenario. You need to apologize for being late to something. You arrive and say, "I'm so sorry I'm late. I wasn't being respectful of your time, and I apologize. Thank you for your patience. Let me make it up to you." The other person responds, "It's okay, stuff happens." You say, "I appreciate your understanding, but I want you to know I'll be more careful in the future. I value your time." This apology works because it acknowledges the mistake, explains why it was wrong, expresses genuine sorrow, and makes a commitment to change. That's a real apology. Let's try a scenario where you're making plans with someone. You text a friend, "Hey, are you free this weekend? I'd love to do something together." They respond, "I'm free Saturday afternoon. What did you have in mind?" You reply, "How about we grab lunch and then catch a movie? There's a new one I've been wanting to see." They say, "That sounds perfect. What time should we meet?" You respond, "How about noon at that Italian place we like?" They confirm, "Perfect. See you then." This exchange is clear, specific, and shows consideration for both people's preferences. Everyone knows exactly when and where you're meeting. Now, let's do a scenario where you're expressing a differing opinion respectfully. A friend says, "I think we should travel to Europe next summer." "That sounds amazing, and I see why you want to go. But I actually think Southeast Asia might be better for us because it's more affordable and we could stay longer." They say, I hadn't thought of it that way." You continue, "I'm not saying Europe isn't worth it. I just think for our budget and time, Asia makes more sense. What do you think?" They say, You know what? That's a good point. Let's look at options for both places. You disagreed, but you did it by showing you understood their perspective and presenting your reasoning. That's how you have productive disagreements. Here's a customer service scenario where you need to address a problem. You're in a restaurant, and your food arrives overcooked. You politely flag down your server and say, "Excuse me, I appreciate the quick service, but I ordered this medium rare, and it came out well done. Could the chef potentially remake this for me?" They respond, "Of course, I'm so sorry about that. Let me take that back right away." You say, "Thank you, I really appreciate it." Notice you acknowledged something positive first, clearly stated the problem, made a respectful request, and showed appreciation. This approach usually results in the problem being fixed. Let me give you a scenario about asking for clarification. That sounds interesting. Can I just clarify something? When you said we need to have it ready by Friday, do you mean this Friday or next Friday? They say, "Oh, good catch, next Friday." You respond, "Perfect. That gives us more time. So I'm understanding correctly that the main deliverable is..." Exactly. You've got it. By asking for clarification, you avoided confusion and made sure you're on the same page. This is a professional skill. Finally, here's a scenario about dealing with a misunderstanding. "Hey, I feel like something's off between us. Did I do something to upset you?" "Yeah, you kind of snapped at me yesterday." "Oh gosh, I'm really sorry. That was unfair. I was stressed about work, but that's no excuse for how I spoke to you. Can we talk about it?" They say, "Yeah, I appreciate you bringing it up. Let's talk." You addressed the issue directly, took responsibility, explained without excusing, and opened dialogue. That's how you repair relationships. The common thread through all these scenarios is authenticity, respect, and clear communication. These are the foundations of good conversations in any language. We've covered so much ground together today. I want to take this final section to give you some perspective on what you've learned and how to move forward from here. Think about where you started in this podcast. Maybe you were feeling insecure about your English conversations. Maybe you knew you could understand English, but speaking felt impossible. Maybe you wondered if you'd ever sound natural. Well, I want to tell you something important. You're closer than you think. Everything we've discussed today isn't abstract theory. These are real phrases that real people use in real situations every single day. Native speakers aren't using special vocabulary or magical grammar rules. They're using simple, accessible phrases that you've now learned. The magic isn't in the phrases themselves. The magic is in what happens when you start using them. When you say, "How's it going?" with genuine warmth, you create connection. When you ask for clarification, instead of nodding confusedly, you show respect. When you apologize genuinely, you build trust. I want to give you some specific action steps for moving forward. First, write down the 3 phrases that resonated most with you from today. Don't try to memorize everything. Just pick 3. Write them down right now if you can. Keep them somewhere visible. Next, use each of those 3 phrases this week in actual conversations. Don't wait until they feel perfect. Just use them. Maybe you'll feel a bit awkward the first time. That's okay. By the 3rd or 4th time, it will feel much more natural. Here's something I want you to do every single day. Spend at least 15 minutes consuming English content that interests you. It could be a podcast, a YouTube video, a movie, or even a TikTok series. The key is that it genuinely interests you. Your brain learns language best when you're engaged and enjoying yourself. While you're consuming this content, listen specifically for the phrases we discussed. You'll be surprised how many you hear. When you hear one, maybe even pause and repeat it. This reinforces it in your brain. Find an opportunity at least once this week to have a conversation in English with someone. It doesn't have to be long. It doesn't have to be about anything profound. Just engage someone in conversation and practice speaking. You'll be surprised at how much you can actually say. Also, start a reflection journal. A couple times a week, write down conversations you had or situations where you used English. Write about what went well and what felt challenging. This reflection helps consolidate your learning. Here's something that might sound unconventional. Don't be afraid of silence in conversations. Native speakers sometimes pause to think of a word. They sometimes sit quietly while someone is speaking. Silence is okay. It doesn't mean something's wrong. Work on your listening skills as diligently as your speaking skills. Often learners focus on speaking but neglect listening. Watch movies with subtitles in English if that helps. Listen to podcasts. Get your ear adjusted to English sounds and patterns. Develop a growth mindset about mistakes. Every mistake is information. It's telling you something about what you need to practice more. Instead of being embarrassed about mistakes, get curious. What can you learn from this? Find a language community. This could be an online group, a local conversation group, or even just friends who are also learning English. Having people on the same journey makes the process more enjoyable and keeps you accountable. Remember that fluency is a journey, not a destination. There's no point where you're done learning English. Native speakers are always learning, expanding their vocabulary, discovering new phrases. You're not trying to achieve perfection. You're trying to improve and communicate better. I also want you to remember that your accent, your unique way of expressing yourself, your background, these are assets, not liabilities. The world doesn't need more people who sound exactly like news anchors. It needs people who can communicate authentically and make genuine human connections. As you move forward, you might encounter moments of doubt. You might have conversations that don't go well. You might feel like you're not making progress. In those moments, I want you to remember this. Progress is rarely linear. You're building something real and important. One more thing. Celebrate small wins. Every time you use a phrase and it lands well, that's a win. Every time you understand something without translating it first, that's a win. Every time you keep a conversation going instead of shutting down, that's a win. These small wins add up to real change. I genuinely believe that if you apply even a fraction of what we've discussed today, you will see real improvement in your English fluency and confidence within weeks. This isn't hype. This is based on how language learning actually works. You have everything you need. You have the phrases, you have the understanding of how to use them. You have the knowledge that this is possible. What you need now is to actually do it. This podcast is here for you whenever you need it. You can come back and listen to specific sections whenever you need a refresher. You can use the phrases we've discussed over and over until they become second nature. Before you go, I want to remind you about our podcast playlist. All of our episodes are organized and waiting for you there. Whether you want to dive deeper into any specific topic we discussed today or explore other aspects of English communication, the playlist has you covered. Also, please share this podcast with someone else who's working on their English. When you share, you're not just helping them, you're reinforcing your own learning. Explaining what you've learned to someone else is one of the best ways to solidify that knowledge. And subscribe if you haven't already. I'm putting out new content all the time, and you won't want to miss it. New subscribers get notifications for every new episode, so you'll never fall behind. Thank you. Truly, thank you for spending this time with me. Thank you for investing in yourself and your growth. Thank you for showing up and being willing to improve. That takes courage and determination. I'm rooting for you. I genuinely believe in your ability to speak English with confidence and fluency. The combination of clear communication, authentic connection, and consistent practice will get you there. It's not a matter of if, It's a matter of when. So go out there, practice these phrases, have conversations, make mistakes, learn from them, keep going. You're going to do amazing things with your English. This is Lily, and I'll be here whenever you need me. Keep learning, keep growing, and keep speaking. I can't wait to hear about how far you go with your English journey. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. Remember to check out our podcast playlist for more content, subscribe for new episodes, and please share this with anyone who would benefit from it. Until next time, keep practicing, stay curious, and believe in yourself. I'll see you in the next episode.